Okay, so for this lesson, we're going to continue learning about perpendicular lines, but we're going to practice finding their equations without the graph. Sorry, perpendicular lines. Okay, so I just want to review the last video, but if you haven't watched the last video, make sure you go back and watch it because it will help you understand a lot of the concepts in this video. So let's remember how the slopes were. So, okay, first let's remember perpendicular lines make a perfect right angle. Make a perfect 90-degree angle. And the way to make that happen on a graph is using their slope relationship. So if I look at the slope of my red line, just to remember, just to review, I can see that this slope is the red slope is going down 1 over 4. So in other words, the slope ratio is negative 1/4. So let's look at the slope ratio of my blue line. It's going over 1 up 4. So it's positive 4 over 1. So the important thing to remember from the previous video is the slopes of perpendicular lines are opposite reciprocals. The opposite means there's always going to be one that's positive and one that's negative, and the reciprocal means that we're going to flip the rise and the run. So in today's lesson, you're going to find the equations for perpendicular lines using this new slope relationship. So make sure you have a good example sketch in your notes, and you definitely need to have this key phrase right here, which we're going to keep working on, making sure everybody understands those words. All right, so I think we're going to do 3 examples in this video. So the first example, I'm going to give you a graph, but I also want you to solve it algebraically. So let me just clarify. So we're going to solve this problem 2 ways. We're going to solve this problem graphically. Sorry, this is example 1, if you want to write that down. And we're going to solve it graphically, and then we're also going to solve it algebraically. Okay, so let's start by looking at the graph. Our first step is to figure out the slope of the line. I guess, let me write the step somewhere. Okay, so step 1 is identify the slope of your line. So if I'm looking at my graph, the way that I can find my slope is just doing my little slope triangles. For these problems, you're going to really have to pay attention to positive, negative slopes. So I can see this one has a negative slope. So it's a negative slope, and the rise is 3, and the run is 1. So that's my slope ratio for my green line. So once I have my slope of my original line, I need to find the slope of the perpendicular line. So how do I do that? I find the opposite reciprocal. So what does that mean? I'm going to flip my rise and my run and make it positive. So my perpendicular slope is going to be positive 3 over 1. So, whoops, sorry, incorrect. Positive 1 over 3, because I'm flipping it. So if it's giving me the point right here, now I'm just going to go over 1 up 3, over 1 up 3, or down 1 over 3, down 1 over 3. And that gives me my points on my line, which I can sketch. And write the equation for. Okay, so step 1, find the slope. Step 2, find the opposite reciprocal. Step 3, when we're solving this out algebraically, is going to be to set up the equation to solve for b. So I know when I have my graph, I can just look at the graph and see that my y-intercept is going to be negative 4. But let's look at how we would do that algebraically. So let's look over here at this. This is the same example, the same equation and the point. But now I want to solve for it algebraically. So I could see here my slope is negative 3. So my opposite reciprocal slope, my new slope is going to be positive 1/3. So let me set up my equation. Y equals positive 1/3 x plus b. That's the part I don't know. And then the rest of this problem is going to be exactly how we did the parallel lines. So I'm just going to plug in my point that has been given to me. So remember, the first one's x, the second one's y. Plug this into the equation to figure out what b has to be. So -3 equals 1/3 times 3 plus b. This is where you have to be really careful, because if you type it into your calculator, you're going to get a really weird decimal, and it's not going to help you solve the problem. So to do this multiplication, we're going to remember that we multiply 1 times 3 and then divide that result by 3. So because 3 times 1 is 3 and the denominator is 3. So now I'm going to end up with -3 equals 1 plus b. So last but not least, when I solve this out, I subtract 1 from both sides. So b equals -4. And if I look back at my graph, I can see that I also had b equals -4. So the really important step 4 that people sometimes have been forgetting is you still need to write out your actual final equation. So step 4 is write out final equation. So my final equation for this problem is my new slope was 1/3 and my y-intercept was -4. So this is the line that's perpendicular to the line they gave me that passes through that point. So let's do one more example. I think the fraction one is going to be tricky. Let's do this example right here. So this is my line and this is my point. So take a minute and pause the video and try to work out this example number 2 before I solve it. All right, so hopefully you paused your video. Let's go through the steps together and see where you guys got stuck or if you got the right answer. So 2 is my slope. So let's start with my original slope is 2. So now I want to find my opposite reciprocal slope. So what is the opposite reciprocal of 2? Well, it's easier for me to, I'm going to write this out. 2 is actually positive 2 over 1. Writing it out that way makes it a lot easier for me to see what the opposite reciprocal is. So I'm going to flip them and make it negative. Since my first slope was positive, my new slope will be negative, so it's going to be -1/2. So that might be the hardest part of this problem, because the rest of the steps is the same as what you guys have been doing for parallel lines, except instead of using the same slope, we're going to use our new slope. So let me write out my equation. It will be y equals -1/2 x plus b plus my y-intercept that I do not know yet. So here's where I just follow the steps I already learned. I'm going to plug in the point that's been given to me and figure out what b has to be. So make sure you keep track of which one's x and which one's y. All right, so my new equation turns into 5 equals -1/2 times 4 plus b. Let's work this part out. So as always, when we're multiplying our fraction, I'm just going to do -1 times 4. So that's -4 over 2 plus b. So 5 equals -2 plus b. So I'll add 2 to both sides. And so b equals 7. So don't forget the last step. You need to write your actual solution to the problem. So y equals, and I have to look back at my opposite reciprocal slope, -1/2 x plus 7. So let's just summarize and make sure people can keep track of the steps. So our first step is to identify the slope. Our second step was to find the opposite reciprocal of that slope. Third step is to actually solve out the equation to figure out what y-intercept we need. And then last but not least, you actually have to write your final equation with the opposite reciprocal slope and the b value that you just solved for. So let's do one last example to make sure that people have it really solid. Where did I put my last example? You know what? Yeah, okay. Let's do one last example. So we're going to do -2/3. This is my original line, and this is my point. So let me give you guys, take a minute, pause the video, and try to see if you can solve this one out yourself, following the steps, and then turn it back on and see if you get the right answer. All right, so my original slope, starting by noticing my original slope is negative 2/3. It's easy to see the opposite reciprocal of this one because all I'm going to do is flip it. So my opposite reciprocal is positive 3/2. So now I'm just going to set up my new equation. Y equals positive 3/2 x plus b. And let's plug in the point that they gave me. So negative 6 goes here and positive 9 goes here. And then let's solve that out. So 9 equals 3/2 times negative 6 plus b. So you can turn 3/2 into a decimal. That's fine. But I want you to make sure you understand how to multiply it without doing that. So I'm going to multiply negative 6 times 3, which is negative 18, divided by 2, plus b. And so I think, what am I going to end up with here? 9 equals negative 9 plus b. So b equals to positive 18. So last but not least, let me just write out my equation using my opposite reciprocal slope. 3/2 x plus 18. So make sure you have those two examples solved in your notebook and you have some really clear steps that we can practice this one in class.